Tim Sheens, the West Tigers coach, gone. 3 certainties in rugby league. For next year, sorry. Death, taxes, but no Tim Sheens. They got that one wrong. What has happened today, Hoops?
We'll send in the clowns, Braith. The West Tigers have unveiled their latest circus act, the 5-year plan that was devised over a lavish lunch at Grappa Restaurant, which has been well publicised, has now been slashed to 4 years. And it comes off the back of Tim Sheens beginning to have some concerns about how much longer he could remain in that role as the West Tigers front person and as the head coach. His agent called Lee Hadjipantelis last week to outline the fact that Tim felt as though he was no longer in the right state to remain as the figurehead and head coach of the club. And so as a result, bang, Benji's been saloon passage straight in.
Tim Sheens has made this call. The Tigers have not made this call?
I spoke to Lee earlier today and he's adamant that he was not pushed, that absolutely Sheensy just decided. You look at it, Braith, Sheensy hadn't been in the NRL since 2012. So he had a long time out of the game over in England, limited success. I think he's come back. The game's changed a lot. The media is 24/7 these days. I don't think he was prepared for just the blowtorch and the furnace and how hot it can get in the kitchen at times. So I think he just thought this is the best thing.
Yeah, I agree with Hoops. He wanted a different role, though. This is where it gets interesting. Obviously, Tim Sheens' management did approach the club last week and said, look, he wants to scale back his commitments next year, and I think he'd hoped to transition back into that football, the head of football role, which he had at the club last year. But the club has used this opportunity to fast-track him out the door and keep him on as a potential ambassador or sounding board. But Tim Sheens won't have a hands-on role with the Tigers at all next year.
Gordy, thoughts on this, mate?
Well, Benji's apprenticeship isn't long enough. Now, that's my first thought. Sitting there behind someone like Tim Sheens, if the furnace was too hot for someone that's won competitions and at that age that can handle a press conference, I just don't know what's going to happen next year with, Benji being a rookie coach and then facing all the stuff that Tim Sheens had to face this year. And it can be tiring because we've all sat there before, but now Benji's in the firing line.
All right, Buzz Rothfield, what comes to mind with him is that he said that the Tigers didn't do their due diligence when hiring Sheens. Where did this all start? I mean, we've covered this from the beginning, but how did it happen? How did they make the call? And I suppose, where did it begin? Well,
the easiest way to unpack it, Braith, let's remember Tim Sheens was originally brought back to the West Tigers to be their director of football. It wasn't to be the coach. Michael Maguire was still in charge at that point in time. Then the following season, they made the hardline decision. They decided they were going to sack Michael Maguire. Off the back of that, Lee Hadjipantelis, the chairman, Pascoe, the Paddle Pop CEO, decided that they wanted to take a few friendly media types out for lunch at Grappa. It's a well-known rugby league eatery, Braith, you know well. And as a result of that, Buzz came up with the idea. He simply asked Tim Sheens the question, would you consider doing it? Sheens said yes. Mick, I think you were at this lunch.
I was at that lunch. I was there when Buzz asked the question, and with all due respect to Tim, I almost fell off my chair when he said yes. I couldn't comprehend how they were going to go back to Tim and everything that Tim wanted to do, he could have done as the head of football, which is what his role was there at that stage. But it definitely planted that lunch. Definitely planted the seed, and it was the first time publicly that Tim Sheens had expressed his desire to return to head coach in front of some of the Tigers officials there. Lee Hadjipantelis was there, Justin Pascoe was there, obviously Tim Sheens was there, and a few journos.
Hoops, you spoke to Lee Hadjipantelis today. We tried to get Pascoe on the show for all you Tigers fans. He didn't even get back to us, just so you know. So going back to this lunch, I mean, you talk about Sheens not being experienced enough now with the modern day game or not being ready and all of this. Haven't these guys got something to answer for, the leaders of this club? Like, can they keep making these decisions, these poor decisions, going round and round and round in circles? It's a circus. People are critical of us for coming on this show and talking about them, but they continue to do the same thing over and over again. What did Lee have to say for himself?
They lead with their chin most weeks, Braith, and it's been a road to nowhere over the course, dating back since Tim Sheens was sacked the first time around. Look, I'll give Lee credit where credit's due. He fronted up and he did answer the tough questions. But I do think Lee, in a lot of respects, is a bit delusional. He's got some Stockholm syndrome because He is the chairman of the club. He's on the inside. He wants to see it successful. But in reality, they are a protected species. That board is a protected species sanctuary. Pascal, as the CEO, is a protected species. Lee is a protected species. And he admitted that in the interview that I had with him this afternoon. He said, look, we are a private entity. We are a privately owned company. We don't answer to anybody. So in a sense, yes, we are looked after. But of course they want to have success. They don't know what it looks like. They don't know how to get there. They are throwing darts in the dark, just hoping they hit something.
And further to Hoops' points, they feel like Tim has done his job because they all are of the belief and they're pushing the line that Tim Sheens believes that Benji Marshall's ready to take over. So if you ask them what was one of Tim Sheens' major roles at the club was to have Benji Marshall ready to coach, and they feel like he's ready.
Can I ask this? Cerveldo, right, had a bit longer apprenticeship, had his own side. So say he's probably, been at 8 to 10 years? How's he going at the Dogs?
Struggling.
And Benji, so like that's the thing. And then I like Benji. This is not against Benji, but has he coached?
And I can't think of a tougher job that a rookie coach has walked into. Back-to-back wooden spoons for a rookie coach. That's unheard of.
Well, Hoops, you spoke to Lee, and Lee also spoke to the media. West Tigers chairman Lee Hadjimantelis fronted the media this afternoon to address Tim Sheens' departure from the club. Take a look.
Tim has voluntarily stepped down from the position that he was holding. The outreach came from his management within the last week. They wanted to speak to us about reconfiguring the coaching structure for 2024 and beyond, and the discussions proceeded from that to where we landed today. Somewhat of a surprise, I'll concede that. However, it was a 2-year transition, and so it was always within our contemplation that within that 2 years, something like this might occur. Tim has spoken very highly about Benji and how he's exceeded everyone's expectations with respect to his assumption of the head coaching role. And as I say, and Tim, with all the good grace that he could muster, came to us and said that Benji's ready.
A little bit of a concern that we're hearing rumours now that Benji's the next target in terms of his future here?
No. Benji is as secure as he could possibly be. No, that's ridiculous. No, Tim wasn't the answer. Tim was brought on as a transition coach for the purpose of elevating Benji into the head role. So Tim has fulfilled that expectation. But let me just say publicly, we could not be more grateful to Tim for what he's done for this club. He saw us through a very difficult and challenging period to where we are now. We always had anointed Benji as a future long-term head coach of the West Tigers. And we asked for Tim's assistance in elevating Benji into that role, which he did, and he fulfilled it perfectly. This is simply what was to occur next year. It's happened a year earlier because we are ahead of that schedule that we had put into place. And as I say, instigated by Tim, who has now come to the view and he has assessed Benji as being ready to step into that role. And I mean, I can't disagree with that. I mean, from what I've seen, Benji has assumed a very senior posture already within the organisation and he's now been endorsed by Tim. So a credit to Tim and a credit to Benji.
So the future's bright, Lee?
Very.
Extremely bright. That's interesting. I can't get my head around it. So Tim wasn't the answer, he said. He said that Tim did fulfil their expectation, and he said they're ahead of schedule.
He's delusional.
They're coming last.
Yeah. They've won 3 games, right? They won 4 games last season. They're about to collect back-to-back wooden spoons. With respect to Lee, he's a great talker. He could talk underwater.
He's a lawyer.
He could talk underwater.
He's a lawyer, but he's done it all year, Hoops.
He could talk underwater with a mouthful of marble spray.
He can put you to sleep as well.
Yeah, he can, right? And what he's doing there is just ducking, diving, weaving, and not really answering the question.
Aren't the fans sick of the ducking and
weaving? Of course they are.
I'm sick of it.
Everybody's over it. Yeah. Everybody is over it, okay? So they didn't do their due diligence on Tim Sheens. That's been laid bare. That is factual reality as we sit here right now. If they had, they would have known that in England he had very limited success. Things were on the wane. Clubs were quite happy to see the back of him. Nobody was rushing out with a checkbook to try and bring Tim Sheens into their organisation. But they've become such an abject failure and they don't know what they don't know that they just make bad decision after bad decision.
Yeah, it's a real sticking point now for the Tigers. One thing I will say about the West Tigers is if I'm looking at the bottom 3 clubs at the moment, the Tigers, the Bulldogs and the Dragons, I think the Dragons have the worst roster long-term out of all of them. So if I'm the Tigers, I don't think it's as bad as where the Tigers, I know they're going to finish last this year, and their half situation next year is not ideal, but they have unearthed some young players. Like Buller at fullback is going to be a superstar, and we keep hearing about these young kids that that they've been banging on about for the last couple of years. Well, I think next year's their time that they need to step up.
To be fair, they've been very competitive this year and at times look really good. And a lot of that's been off the back of Luke Brooks, but he moves on next year. But they've unearthed some really good players, and with the right coach and the right system, culture, which is what they need, they can do well next year and they can fight for that top 8 spot. But is Benji Marshall the answer? You just mentioned it then, Gordy.
I hope he is, right, for the Tigers, and we need him to be successful for the game. But, I think you need to coach. To be a coach, you need to coach. To be an assistant, as I said, if I coached at the Roosters or Melbourne Storm or Penrith in the last 10 years, I've won competitions without having the range myself. When you get the range yourself, Benji's done 2 press conferences. It's worn Tim Sheens out with what's happened with Scott Fulton, the club and all that. That's what you've got to deal with as a head coach. And is Benji ready for that?
Well, he'll know quick smart because, as you said, Gordy, there's no real end in sight. Although the roster may make incremental improvements next year, they're still going to be a bottom 4 side next year. I can't, with the halves pairing that they've got next year, I can't see much advancement in that. So this is a club that's going to win back-to-back wooden spoons with an untried coach. And we've seen, the last couple of years, you mentioned Cameron Serrato, Craig Fitzgibbon, Jason Demetrio, these guys had long-term apprenticeships, long. Adam O'Brien, these guys had coached for a long time elsewhere, and they've gone through their ups and downs as well. But I don't think there's a tougher job in the NRL than the West Tigers at the moment, and you're giving it to a rookie coach.
I think Benji's got potential. I've said that on the show before,
Yes.
and I think he can be a great coach further down the path. What about the help? Are they going to stick with who they've got there at the moment? Are they bringing anyone in? What's the plan to and who are they going to surround Benji with?
Well, they're in the market. They're pushing hard to try and get John Morris from Souths. That's their priority target. They obviously had a crack at Justin Holbrook. That didn't come to fruition. He's now
I don't
with the
even think
Roosters.
they met Justin Holbrook.
But
That
they
was
were in the
plan.
ring. They
That
were
was
in the
plan.
ring. They had identified him
They were a bit
as
slow
somebody.
they were a bit slow off the mark to nail Holbrook.
Shock horror. It stuns me. But in relation to who else they're going to bring in, Braith, look, I think they will make some changes. I really like Dave Ferner, but he was somebody who was brought into the club through Tim Sheens, so I would think that they would be looking at his position beyond this season. And then aside from that, look, you wouldn't know the way that they're running things, Braith. Like, genuinely, nothing would shock you after the circus that we've seen repeatedly unfold over the course of the last 5 seasons.